Hello, and welcome to this week's Retroactive Podcast. Before we get started, we're going to take a look at some of the crazy things going on in the world. Become a bit of a tradition with these Retroactive Podcasts. I'm actually going to miss that when it's gone, but you guys will probably be thrilled. But what can I say? The world is just such a crazy place that, if you can't use your podcast to comment on it at least a little bit, what are you doing it for? So, the DNC is this week. The Democrats are having their national convention, and it looks like Kamala is going to be their candidate. It's been looking that way for a while, but now it's official. And I am thrilled to be wrong. I still thought that they were going to drop in Michelle Obama up until a couple weeks ago. I am thrilled to be wrong. That would have been a much smarter move than sticking with Kamala. So I'm happy with it, just the same way that I was happy that she chose Tim Walz as a running mate. She could not have made a worse choice. That guy's radical record is going to follow them around like a bad smell. So it's actually great unless they make it into office on some miracle. But I'm not somebody that's ever going to hesitate to admit I was wrong. So, hey, I thought they were going to go with Michelle Obama. I was wrong. I was right that they were going to kick out Joe Biden. I was right that they were going to use the debate to do it. But I was wrong about which candidate they were going to go with afterwards. And I think it's important to admit when you're wrong, because trust is a fragile thing. None of us are going to be right all the time. That's not possible, and we understand that about human beings. We accept that about each other. If you have a human being that can't ever admit when they're wrong, then deep down we all know that's somebody you can't trust. Trust is fragile. And look, I've said that I've kind of had my fill of the Democrats right now as an independent. I want to see them lose. I want to see them lose hard, because I want them to lose hard enough that it forces them to reevaluate some of their more recent choices. But that being said, I am going to offer the Democrats, especially those on the far left, one last piece of advice. Be careful where you spend what little trust you've got left. This week, Nancy Pelosi made headlines talking about how Joe Biden should be added to Mount Rushmore. Are you serious? We know you're not serious. You know you're not serious. Everybody knows you're not serious. Setting aside the fact that the only reason he'd be up there is so that good presidents could judge him for the awful job he's done. Even setting that aside, name me one accomplishment that competes with being the father of our nation, writing the Declaration of Independence, or ending slavery on this continent. Go ahead, I'm waiting for what was Joe Biden's contribution to the world that is of that same ranking that means he should be carved up there. You don't believe that. We don't believe that. Nobody believes that. All you did with these outlandish remarks is underscore the feeling that a lot of people already have that we can't trust you. You won't be straight with us. You lie when it's convenient for you. And in this case, you spent a lie on something that doesn't even matter. Joe Biden is not running again. Trust is fragile. And once you've broken it enough times, and it doesn't take very many to reach enough times, a lot of times it's unrecoverable. So keep smashing that glass. And keep doing it for no real reason, and see where that gets you in the long run. Meanwhile, the DNC is kicking off the festivities by offering free abortions and free vasectomies at a nearby mobile clinic. These people really know how to partay Wow. There really are no words for how weird these people are. I mean, I know they like to call everyone else weird, but there really are no words. What is wrong with you people? Seriously, what is wrong with you people? They've even got an inflatable IED. No, wait, that's the Hamas groupies. They have an inflatable IUD. It's like 18 feet tall. Okay, I'm from the Bible Belt, so this is like reminding me of when Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, and he leaves his brother in charge, and the whole camp descends into a gigantic orgy, and they make a golden calf and start worshiping it, even though they've literally heard the voice of God a few days ago. And so there they are, worshiping their golden cow. You guys are worse. You're worshiping an 18-foot contraceptive device. You need help. I'm sorry, but you people need help. The mayor of Chicago is going to be speaking. This would be the same mayor that recently made headlines with all the Hamas groupies who love him now because he, as mayor of a city on the other side of the world, has called for a ceasefire in Gaza. Dude, as mayor of Chicago, maybe you should be more worried about a ceasefire in Chicago, okay? Like, seriously, gun violence is way up in your city. Stick to your own area, please. I love all these people calling for shit, you know? I call for Pluto to move next to Venus. Wait, I mean, I thought that's what we were doing, right? I thought it was brave and beautiful to call for things that you have absolutely no say over. And seriously, you guys really need to hide James Carville in a basement. You do. That old man is batty as Robin in the Batcave, okay? I mean, seriously, every time you let him on the air, all he does is display that he's human garbage, morally speaking. I mean, for him to accuse everyone, everywhere, who supports Israel of doing so only because the Israelis are whiter than the Palestinians. Okay, dude, as someone who supports Israel, I'm going to try to speak slowly. I know you're probably high on something, at least you always come off that way, but no, I don't support Israel because some Israelis are whiter in skin tone than some Palestinians. I support Israel because they don't behead babies or burn them alive or gang rape women. And the Palestinian government does and has. I support the Israelis because they don't gang rape women to death and shoot them in the genitals. And the government of Palestine does and has. I support the Israelis because they don't stone their own daughters to death for being raped. And the government of Palestine does and has. I support Israel because they don't throw gay men from rooftops. And the government of Palestine does and has. I support Israel because they're not holding infants who had to celebrate their first birthday in captivity as hostages. And the government of Palestinians is doing that at this very moment. I support Israelis because they don't use their own people's sewer pipes to make rocket launchers and steal their aid, abandoning them to live in their own sewage. And the Palestinian government does. I support Israelis because when they control the Temple Mount, all religions are welcome to visit and pray there. Whereas when Palestinians control it, they ban Jews and Christians from praying at the very site that was sacred to them for hundreds, and in the Jews' case, even thousands of years before Islam even existed. I support Israelis because they haven't started 5 wars in this millennia alone. And the government of Palestine has. I know projection is a big word for someone with your little brain to understand, but just because you're racist doesn't mean I am. It doesn't mean everyone who supports Israel does so for racist reasons. Just because you think of everything in terms of race and the paleness or darkness of someone's skin determines who you support, that doesn't mean that that's the gauge the rest of us use. And if you were intelligent enough to read a book, you would know that 1 in 5 Israelis are Arab. Brown people, you would call them. And many Jews are from Morocco, Ethiopia, and other places like that. They are what you like to call people of color. If we're truly basing everything we think off of racist ideas, if we're all white supremacists, then why are we supporting the Jews? If you had even a basic grasp of history, you would know that white supremacists typically have not been very warm toward the Jewish people. I direct you to a small event known as World War II and the Holocaust. It's interesting. You should read up on it. What an imbecile. Donald Trump, on the other hand, I will give credit to. He has Jewish grandchildren. And despite the many, many things I don't like about him, he at least was willing to condemn the ugliness of anti-Semitism that you've embraced in your party and in yourself. And Trump, at least, was clear about it. Quote, if you hate America, if you want to eliminate Israel, then we don't want you in our country. We really don't want you in our country. And I agree with him. If you want to eliminate an entire race of people from this world, yeah, I really don't want you as my neighbor. That's not unreasonable. Trump also continued, they say that going to the Democrat convention next week are going to be hundreds of thousands of people that are opposed to Israel. That's their big problem. That's their thing. Not even believable, but hundreds of thousands they're projecting right now. Hundreds of thousands. That's a lot. We will not let a jihad. There will be no jihad coming to America under Trump, I can tell you. If Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are elected, the radical left flag burners and Hamas sympathizers will not just be causing chaos on our streets, they'll be running U.S. foreign policy in the White House, and Israel will be gone. It will be gone. I never thought I'd say that a year ago, even 2 years ago. I never thought I'd say it, but Israel will be gone, I believe. End quote. Now, I believe Israel is in danger of that, but they've survived worse. So my money's on them. I don't think they'll be gone. But he is right that that is what Democrats will try to accomplish in their bigotry, and the radicals that they've embraced as their new base of their party, like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar, like Tim Walz, Bernie Sanders, and James Carville, and by extension Kamala Harris, who refuses to condemn them and embraces them as a part of her future administration by choosing them as her running mates and saying that she will consider a full weapons embargo to Israel. I will say again, if I have to vote for Trump in order to get you out, I will. Count on it. Not that I enjoy it, especially when he wants to get sidetracked onto public arguments about who's prettier, him or Kamala. Okay, like, seriously. And of course, being Trump, he argues that he's the prettier one. I don't care what either one of you look like. And it's that kind of childishness that is a bigger turnoff than anything else. So, can you please knock that sort of stuff off? Because it just makes the fact that I'm probably going to have to vote for you to keep these other worse people out that much more nauseating to me when you do this sort of stuff. However, in lighter news, it's nice to see that the Secret Service has learned from their failure to protect former President and current presidential candidate Donald Trump from being shot by a 20-year-old loner assassin. On Thursday, a Secret Service agent abandoned her post at another Trump rally in North Carolina in order to breastfeed her baby and went MIA. She also let in 2 of her family members, past security, to be with her as she breastfed in the secure room set aside for the president's security in the event of an emergency. She, a breastfeeding mother, wasn't on desk duty even after a recent assassination attempt. She was on active duty for the very target of the last shooting, and took that responsibility so seriously that she abandoned her post without warning, helped people bypass a security checkpoint, and took them to a restricted area without authorization, and went MIA on one of the most important security jobs in the world, less than a month after the first presidential assassination attempt in my lifetime. I feel so much better. The Secret Service, however, assures us that this was no big deal, as there was, quote, no impact to the North Carolina event. Oh, good. So we should only be outraged when your incompetence succeeds at getting someone shot again, and innocent bystanders killed in cold blood? I didn't realize that was the standard for outrage. I thought we could be outraged over things like pronouns and misgendering, where nobody's life is being put in danger. But then again, we're not supposed to be outraged when Jews are physically barred from classrooms and spat on, or forced to barricade themselves in a library from a mob baying for their blood. And we should defend those who vandalize the flag, burn it, take over the Capitol, and graffiti historic monuments like the Freedom Bell by spray painting anti-Semitic pro-Hamas threats against the American public. So I'll admit the lines of your morality are a tad blurry. But rest assured, the Secret Service says the specifics of this incident are being examined. They don't need to be. There is no possible excuse for this. They simply say, quote, "We are not in a position to comment further." I am. Fire her. Then fire the person who kept her on active duty as a breastfeeding mother rather than putting her on a desk job. See? Easy. The agent who discovered that she was missing at her post is also being looked into for several violations of their own at a recent rally, but she remains in charge of Trump's security. Some of these violations include posting photos to the internet from her secure assignments, so social media can see what's going on, taking selfies at Mar-a-Lago and posting them to Instagram, chatting about the pretty sunset and how grateful she is for it, while she was on duty. Trump had a line for this kind of unacceptable subpar performance. What was that? Oh yes, "You're fired." There are also photos of guards at Mar-a-Lago sleeping on duty, and a random guy on the street snuck into the Miami Secret Service field office unobserved after agents deliberately left the door propped open for ventilation and then failed to watch it. The man came in through the door, took a shower, and fell asleep in a bed where he remained undiscovered all night. He accessed computers and downloaded porn, so he had himself a good time. And in the morning, he found the administrative staff. They didn't find him. He found them in order to ask them where he could get a cup of coffee around here. And if you're wondering if that's how he was caught, no. The Secret Service still didn't realize that he didn't belong there, and they got him his cup of coffee. After his coffee, he wandered into a class that a supervisor was teaching on defense tactics, where the supervisor finally realized he shouldn't be here, confronted him, discovered his identity, and finally apprehended him. You know, half these problems could be solved by making a law that people who serve in government jobs are not allowed to even have social media accounts. That would weed out a lot of people. And it would ensure that the rest weren't busy looking around for selfie opportunities instead of doing their job. It'd weed out a lot of the bad apples. And what would weed out the rest is firing everybody and starting from scratch. But the main headlines I want to talk about today concern two of my favorite podcasters. As you are aware, if you've listened to any of my other retro episodes, I'm a Jordan Peterson fan. I like the guy. His wisdom helped me through a personally bad time in my life. I don't demand that everybody else feel the same way about him I do. I just don't understand why, if you don't like him, you just don't walk away. Why do you need to destroy the man? Why do you need to try to take him from the people who do like him? Why do you need to try to cut him off from the people that feel like he's helping them? That doesn't seem like a very caring and compassionate thing to do to other people in the world just because you don't like him. If you don't like him, don't watch him. Problem solved. Everybody happy. Well, Jordan has been convicted in the Supreme Court of Canada. He's been appealing his case. A bunch of people complained about him online. They lied. They have been caught in their lies. They didn't claim to be strangers online. They claimed to be his former patients. All of those claims were actually proven false in court. But instead of throwing out the rest of their claims, since they've perjured themselves and been exposed as liars and therefore have no credibility, the system that wanted to get him for misgendering people told him that they were going to take away his degree as a psychologist unless he submitted to indefinite reprogramming at his own expense. He appealed that. The Supreme Court recently said that they were going to uphold that decision. He either has to lose his license that he earned by going through college, or he has to submit to indefinite reprogramming until they decide that he's fixed at his own expense, which for the time being he claims he's going to go through with. Now, this concerns me on multiple levels. It concerns me for him personally because he's had very serious life-threatening health problems in the past, and this kind of stress could very well cause those to flare back up. And I think, killing someone because you don't like their politics is a tad on the extreme side. Number two, it's a huge problem for free speech, which is taking hits all around the world this week. Look, you can have whatever opinion about Jordan Peterson you want to have. You can have whatever opinion you want to have about misgendering people and how serious that is or isn't, or whether it should be illegally prohibited and punishable, or whether it should just be considered rude, or whatever. I don't really care. But this is a man who writes psychology books. He's authorized to do so. He's gone through the training. He's highly intelligent. He's got an IQ well above 150. He is very well read. He reaches a lot of people. He has recently started Peterson Academy, and it looks phenomenal. As somebody who, as a disabled person, spent a lot of my youth reading and living vicariously that way, hey, if I had 2 dimes to rub together, I would be signing up for Peterson Academy to take some of these courses because they are incredible looking. And they're being taught by some of the most amazing people in the world, people that would never be your professors at a physical college, but in this online college, Peterson Academy, for $450 a year, you can be taught all these subjects with high graphic, customized art, being taught by the best people in the world. He's trying to offer scholarships to people in third world countries who would otherwise never have the opportunity to be educated, that if they are intelligent, if they are promising, and it is just their location that is the problem, he's going around and getting scholarships from corporations so that those people can attend his academy online and maybe become the next Elon Musk and make contributions to the world that could help all of us. This is a man doing good things. And it's not right to sit by and just watch people in positions of power use that power to bully him because they disagree with him. They're allowed to disagree with him. That's fine. So when he says something you don't like, make a better argument than he does. Prove him wrong. Make a better case. Don't try to drive him into a health breakdown in the hopes that you'll kill him. And yeah, Jordan is a big boy, believe me. He's more than capable of fighting for himself. It's going to be interesting to watch. But that doesn't mean he should have to. As kids on a playground, we sat there and knew that if the bully is picking on a little kid, trying to beat him up, that it is incumbent on the rest of us to say, hey, no, stop it, back off, we're going to go get the teacher, whatever you needed to do to break it up. Because if you don't, then the bullies take over. And next thing you know, it's going to be you getting pummeled. It's going to be you getting the rocks thrown at you. We knew that instinctively as children, and we need to remember it as adults. We need to be willing to start saying, no, this type of stuff is not allowed. This is not what government is there for. It is not there to bully people with different ideas. That is not their job. That is not what we, the people, have empowered them to do. It is not moral. It is not acceptable. And we need to become a society where doing that is an automatic, you're out of the game. You abuse your power, you're out. We're voting you out, even if we agree with everything else you say on politics. Which brings me to another podcaster that I very much enjoy, Douglas Murray. Some of you may be familiar with his debates and his books. Once again, another very intelligent man who is highly educated. He's a journalist. He travels to war-torn countries. He's been in Israel for the past 6 months or so. He's gone into Palestine, which as a gay man was a ballsy move, dude. But he wrote a book, The Strange Death of Europe, a few years ago, talking about how certain problems that were being allowed at the time and are continued to being allowed, where they were going to lead to, that it was going to lead to bad places. And he's recently been proven right with the riots going on in Britain. He's never encouraged the riots. He simply said these policies will cause this result. That result will cause this kind of discontent. This kind of discontent will cause these problems. And here we are. He was right. He was Cassandra. He didn't make it happen. He, in fact, tried to stop it from happening by hoping that if he warned about it, people would listen and change course before we had to get here. But they didn't. And now the very people who instituted the very policies he warned against are blaming him for the unrest. As though if he hadn't warned about it years ago, then years later, people wouldn't be rioting in Britain as a result of the policies. They would just have somehow no idea that these policies were affecting their lives in a bad way and be upset about it. Beyond being incredibly stupid to even claim that. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you go watch Konstantin Kisin. It's a 7-minute clip where he talks about this exact issue in much more eloquence than I can. As someone else who wrote an immigrant's love letter to the West, talking about the very same issues as Douglas Murray warned about. We, especially on the internet, have a very bad habit of having so many stories come at us that we forget most of them. I mean, here in America, we're still talking about January 6th. Disgraceful and out-of-control riot. And yeah, you can be mad on me on the right for that. What they did was wrong. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it wasn't. So be mad. But it was an out-of-control riot that happened several years ago. Somebody just tried to shoot the president for the first time in my lifetime a month ago, and that's already forgotten. And that's because so many stories on so many subjects, all of them wild, keep coming at us at crazy speeds. And so having a memory is going to require some effort from this point on. And it needs to be remembered who abuses power and in what ways. Who makes these dumb arguments that the person who warned, hey, this policy's bad, it's going to lead to bad things, and then when they're proven right, tries to blame them instead of stepping up and saying, you know what, I thought that policy was going to be a good thing. I was wrong. It was my policy, my bad. And if you vote me out, I understand. The best I can offer is that I'm taking responsibility for it. I've learned from it, and we're going to try to do better. We need to remember the people that don't do that try to victim blame, that try to point to everybody else, that try to always shut down free speech and make it where people are afraid to even put warnings out there because they're going to be blamed next. Or if they go against the grain in the slightest degree, like Jordan Peterson, they're going to have their professional license taken away. They're going to be fired from their job, or they're going to be this and that, this. That is not who we are. We are a country and a Western world that says, if you have an idea I don't like, then I have two choices. I can either not listen to you, or I can get up on that stage when you're done and make a better argument than you did so that other people are not fooled by you. Those are your two choices. Never before have we said it's okay to silence that person and put them in jail for having an idea you don't like. There are plenty of people out there, these Hamas groupies probably are at the top of my list right now, who have ideas I don't like. I personally think those ideas are based on a profound ignorance of the issues, fueled by the enthusiasm of youth that wants to change the world, wants to be part of a big movement like the civil rights movement or something, and has no idea what cause to choose. They've clamped onto this, but they're not willing to do the work. They're not willing to educate themselves on the reality of this situation to make sure they're fighting on the right side. In their desire to be Martin Luther Kings, they are actually marching for the KKK. And they will eventually grow up enough to see that, but for right now they don't. My solution was to start writing articles on this stuff. My very first set of articles was How Not to Be a Nazi. It broke down the history, the politics, all of it, of this conflict between Israel and Palestine. I didn't say, don't let them talk, let's throw them in prison, let's do this, let's do that. It was like, no, I can make a better case than you can. And I did. And I'll go on making it. That's how we settle things. So let's remember who we are and who we want to be, because it is important. And we don't want to wake up and find that we were the generation that lost the greatest civilization and the greatest privileges that any group of humans has ever had in the history of this planet. And now, for today's retroactive podcast, a few of my least favorite things, Part 3, Sanctuary. I've been debating about what present-day issue should fill the final slot in the last edition of this series. Let's be honest, there are a lot of things that could take the cake. There are a lot of concerns taking place in today's world, both in politics and in culture, in society's thinking, and in debates on morality, how to choose from such a buffet of options. I decided on today's subject because it isn't being talked about anywhere else to my knowledge. It's a concept you wouldn't have been familiar with more than a decade ago, and to be honest, I thought it was a strange idea even then. But no one made a fuss, at least not a loud enough one to alert people, and now it's totally out of control. It began with a bad idea that should have been rejected on its face, and it has now spawned a whole litter of hybrid problems. We can waste a lot of time, which we may not have, chasing down each rabbit and dealing with these problems individually, or we can go to the source and literally take off the head of Hydra, so to speak. I am referring to the concept of sanctuary. No, not the medieval run into a cathedral, bells tolling and refuse to come out kind of sanctuary. I mean the city-state variety. People love to debate the separation of church and state. Well, here's a perfect example of why the state isn't allowed to steal from the church's playbook. The first sanctuary city in the United States was created in 1971, Berkeley. They always have been trouble. But these cities didn't really gather support or become accepted as normal by mainstream America until the Obama administration. This is more than just another failed policy. One built on lofty ideals that sounded good and worked out poorly in the real world. This is now causing all kinds of trouble. It's a bad idea. At its heart. A bad idea and a dangerous one, as we are finding out. Though I still haven't heard anyone else link the problem to the source. As you cannot fail to have heard, we are a democracy. In a democracy, the people elect their leaders, and the leaders vote on the laws. If the leaders make laws that the people don't like, we vote them out and elect new leaders who amend or overturn the laws. So it is literally a government put in power by the people, electing representatives out of the people to serve the best interests for the people. At least that's how it's supposed to work. But the whole idea of a sanctuary city is basically a city that's allowed to break the law. Instead of working within the system, making your case and convincing people, then legally voting in the laws you have convinced the people to back, a sanctuary city throws a tantrum. Like a toddler, these cities say, "I don't like that." However legal it may be, and despite the fact that the people, as in the Democratic majority, have spoken via democracy, the city just sits down and holds its breath, deciding to break the law. It refuses to accept that in any democracy, no one gets their way all the time. They lost that round, as we all frequently do, but for some reason we have let them spit on democracy because they want to act like angry children over even an occasional loss. It's a bad decision to allow defiance of law and order on principle. But it gets worse when the toddler holding his breath passes out and has to be rushed to the emergency room. Now, those who should have put their foot down are left with an emergency to handle and a mess to sort out. Obeying the law isn't an optional proposition. If you don't like the law, convince people, protest, work to change it. We forget that part of civil disobedience is accepting the consequences of breaking the law, which is why you do it only when the cost is worth justifying such a thing. Simply put, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. During Obama's presidency, sanctuary cities declared that they would flout immigration laws and refuse to deport criminals, including those who immigrated in an illegal way, thereby committing a crime by any definition of the word. They refused to cooperate with ICE and even aided criminals in circumventing them. They illegally spent tax dollars on programs for illegal immigrants with the money they took from Americans without their permission. They should have been stopped. All government funding should have been cut to these cities. They should have faced charges for aiding and abetting in crimes. But they weren't charged with anything. They weren't even simply made to stop. That isn't democracy. That is the random rule of a tyrannical few. However pure they claim their motives may be, tyranny imposes its will on the people. Whether the tyrant has good intentions or not is beside the point. It's the imposing it part that makes it tyranny. Look, people don't like feeling mean in their treatment of others. They don't feel good about deporting an immigrant family who is looking for a better life and just happened to break a few of the law's details. We certainly don't want to untangle the knot of what to do in complicated situations, like when children of illegals have been born here and are thus citizens. Do we deport our own citizens? Should these minor children be deported with their parents? Do we split up families? Do we legislate changes so that those born in the USA only receive citizenship status if the parents were here legally to begin with? So many questions and so many arguments. It was only a few cities anyway, so we turned a blind eye and hoped it would all go away. Where has that gotten us now? Sanctuary cities are going bankrupt. Illegal immigrants are getting better benefits than Americans. Hotels, food, room service, debit cards, and even health care at taxpayers' expense, and all without their consent to any of this. These drowning cities are in return draining their states and the nation in general with their illegal giveaways. The issue isn't, should we fund these costly benefits for immigrants? It's, does the government have the right to give away things that aren't theirs to give? They should never have been allowed to get away with it. So, are we going to let them continue over our, as in the people's, objections? California has taken this a step further and declared itself a sanctuary state for trans people, who they claim have been barred from receiving gender-affirming care in other states. There's just one problem with that claim. Adults are not prohibited from anything in other states. The only laws in place anywhere else are ones applying to medically transitioning minors. So California is actually a sanctuary state for trans children who would otherwise be made to wait until they are 18 to medically transition. And that's completely setting aside the arguments about how affirming or even life-saving these treatments are according to the data, along with all the rest of the debates over this issue. California now refuses to return runaways in defiance of child protection laws and instead helps them transition, paid for with tax dollars, even without parental consent. They refuse to return children who have been kidnapped by non-custodial parents to the state that is hearing their custody case. They are practically encouraging parents to commit crimes and deprive their child of one of its parents by promising to protect and reward this selfish act. All that a parent who finds their custody case going against them has to do is claim that their child wants to transition and that they are affirming them, while also claiming that the other parent won't consent, and for all practical purposes, if they flee to California, they just won custody. After that, California will protect you, block the child's other parent's rights, and any actions by their home state, and give your child drugs that are likely to cause osteoporosis, liver tumors, blood clots, and render them sterile, setting them on a path for a lifestyle where they are at 10 times the risk for suicide. All of that is before we even get to the horrors involved in these irreversible and, frankly, barbaric surgeries. Immigration and the trans arguments aren't the only issues where sanctuary politics have caused disasters. Crime is up by a lot, and we all know it. Biden's White House swears that crime is down and we shouldn't worry, but we experience it and know that it isn't true. We see the videos of the muggings and the security footage of mass shoplifting. We see the stores closing and more items disappearing behind locked cabinets at the drugstore. I live in a very nice neighborhood. It isn't upper class by any means, but it's in a nice part of town and a very safe one by any standard. I've never had any problems before, aside from a few mischievous neighbor kids. But when my fence blew down in a winter storm, people used the churchyard next door to steal my fence off the ground before I could have it put back up. When I was able to hire someone to replace it, the remaining lumber was stolen that night too. That never would have happened in this neighborhood even 2 or 3 years ago. Police are being assaulted and brutalized. We have the videos to prove it. Med students like Lake and Riley simply walking in the park are being brutally killed. Thieves are walking into stores and scooping up whatever they want, from Nikes to iPhones. Not bread and milk. And everyday people are being pushed onto the tracks in front of subway trains. Yet the Biden administration merely asks us, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? I think that, like me, most people choose to believe their own eyes. But in this case, we don't have to. It's easy enough to understand the game of half-truths being played with the statistics. The number of crimes being committed isn't down. The number of crimes being prosecuted is down. The DAs elected to office and having taken oaths to do their job are declining to prosecute and are being allowed to do so. They decline not based on a lack of evidence, which happens. They simply don't like the law, or they don't like the prison system, or they feel that systemic discrimination is to blame for the criminal's choice to commit crimes. Whatever the political reasoning, they choose not to do the job they swore to do, while they continue accepting the salary. Then they go home to their gated communities and leave the world burning behind them because their ideals demand it. Big of them. Why aren't they being fired? When did obeying and enforcing the laws become optional? When did it become acceptable for every random person to decide which laws they would and would not obey? Just because crimes aren't being punished doesn't mean fewer crimes are being committed. On the contrary, more crimes are being committed because they aren't being punished, as is entirely predictable. A certain race hustler, whom I will leave unnamed rather than publicize him further, suggested that the innovative solution to solving the crime problem is to decriminalize more things. What a textbook, empty solution from a fraudulent snake oil salesman. If you say, we can solve the crime of rape by declaring that rape is no longer a crime, technically that's true. If rape isn't a crime, then the crime stats for rape will go down. But the act of rape will go up. Most people care about there being less acts of rape being committed. They don't really care how you categorize it, or if crime stats go down in some meaningless way while the streets they have to walk become even more dangerous. This is now commonplace thinking that reasons making something sound good is the goal and will make people happy, rather than doing real good in the real world. It is so out of touch. The unbelievable squatter crisis that we are witnessing is appalling. People break into other people's homes and take over. They have no deed, no rental agreement, yet they are protected by so-called squatters' rights. There are cases where the squatters have had the owner arrested for trespassing as they loftily order the owner to get out of their house and off their property, while they hook up lines to steal cable and power from the neighbors. Police have enforced restraining orders against the owners and warned them not to return to their home, saying that it could take 2 years of court dates and lawyers' fees before they can legally kick the defiant squatters out of their own home. This degree of lawlessness and disgraceful victimization of law-abiding citizens by the very system that was designed to protect them in favor of protecting the so-called rights of the lawless scammers and thieves is reaching epidemic proportions. This truly bizarre concept of justice is something I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams only a few years ago. So I, for one, applaud Governor DeSantis for dealing with it, in Florida at least, quickly and justly by signing a new law that puts an end to such scams. If this is allowed to continue on so many fronts for much longer, people are going to snap and take the law into their own hands. And living in a nation of vigilante martial law until order can be restored is a reality that I promise you none of us want to actually experience. Biden plays this dangerous game more than anyone, refusing to enforce the existing border laws and refusing to deport criminals, including those who commit the crime of entering the country illegally, something you would only be motivated to do with our borders wide open if you know that your record shows a link to drug trafficking or human trafficking or terrorism, etc., that would cause you to be refused entry even when almost no one is being denied. Biden, just like the corrupt DAs and these sanctuary cities, refuses to enforce the law. And he is actively trying to stop anyone else from enforcing them either. He has taken Texas to the Supreme Court to stop them from enforcing the laws that are still on the books. His claim basically is that only he can enforce the border, and since he chooses not to, the entire nation has to sit back and watch its laws be violated thousands of times each day. Worst of all, he refuses to listen to the same American people he swore to serve and represent, not caring what they want, only about forcing on them what he wants. We all know what a crisis the border is. It is the number one concern for voters in this coming election, according to every poll, followed by inflation, then the economy, and then crime. Around 10 million people have crossed our border in the last 3 years. I will remind you, this article was written in April. That number is up to about 15 million, possibly more. Free housing and food for them is draining the system and overwhelming our police. Children are being turned out of their schools, rec centers, and after-school programs. The homeless are being turned out of shelters and soup kitchens, and programs for American seniors and American disabled are being cut to pay for all of this, even as we sink further into debt trying to merely stay afloat. And with all of this new competition, we, like the UK, will be seeing a rise in the cost of things like housing as the demand outstrips the supply. And that's before factoring in the soaring cost of rising inflation. Just this week, we watched a mob, not one of desperate families, but of violent young men, rush the National Guard on the border, knock them to the ground, and cross onto American soil to attack a second fence, all while our servicemen are forbidden to defend themselves. Or us. Our country is beginning to descend into chaos, and there will come a point when it will be too late to turn back. Unfortunately, we will only recognize that point in hindsight, as we always do with history, which is why we must put our foot down now, or know that we risk it all. All of these problems go back to the same idea, the same poisonous source: sanctuary cities, sanctuary states. The immigration crisis, trans sanctuary for minors, rising crime, belligerent DAs and presidents, they all have their roots in this one toxic idea, the idea that obeying the law is optional. They believe that if you don't like a law, you can simply ignore it or even break it. It's time to say no. We all have to live with things we don't like. That's life. As the saying goes, you don't like it? Well, I don't like Mondays, but they still come around every so often. No one is above the law, not even the president, not in a democracy. A refusal to enforce the law should mean losing office, whatever that office may be: judges, DAs, governors, presidents, or average sheriffs. And breaking the law, any law, needs to be treated as a crime and prosecuted accordingly. No exceptions. Cooperating with ICE, Border Patrol, or even police isn't optional, so long as they are acting within the limits of their authority under the law. If people don't agree with certain federal laws, they are free to lobby and change them. If they don't like the laws of their state, they are free to move to another state with different laws. But no one gets to break the laws simply because they feel like it. Nor does someone get to take an oath of office and accept a salary on fraudulent terms, refusing to do the job and refusing to vacate the office. They must be fired from these jobs that they aren't doing. Why does this issue matter so much? Because lawlessness and advocating for more lawlessness as the solution to the lawlessness has to start being called out and even ridiculed so that we can reverse course. Unfortunately, common sense isn't that common anymore. And things that once went without saying now actually have to be said. Just this week, a politician who had called successfully for the prosecution of a U.S. Marine who subdued a man with a violent history who was threatening a subway car full of terrified people, including children, voiced complaints over the rise in crime. The heroic Marine she sought to prosecute put the violent man in a chokehold to subdue him, while the dangerous man fought until he passed out. He could not be resuscitated and died. Instead of placing the blame for this terrifying incident on the system that had set this man free repeatedly, while knowing him to be a danger and having known mental health issues, this woman condemned the Marine for the, quote, senseless violence and called for him to be punished. He is presently on trial. This week, the same activist bemoaned the fact that vicious assaults, especially of women, are not being stopped. She criticizes the disappearance of Good Samaritans, who for some reason are no longer interfering. She seems to lack the intelligence to connect the dots, failing to realize that Good Samaritans are already risking their safety and lives when they help strangers, and now she has added the risk of prison time to that. So fewer people are going to take the risk of getting involved out of the goodness of their hearts to help a stranger. She also advocated for defunding the police during the violent BLM riots. Somehow she can only wonder why, with fewer police on the streets to deal with dangerous criminals, and the prosecution of Good Samaritans taking place, what could possibly be the mysterious cause behind the rise in both the degree and the frequency of violent attacks? Social media is being flooded right now with sobbing women posting videos minutes after being randomly punched in the face by strangers on the streets of Manhattan. They have been assaulted not after a dispute, but for no reason other than having crossed paths with a violent person who wished to indulge in their desire to perpetrate violence on a random stranger. All the activists who love to say, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, having watched too many Laura Croft movies as kids, thought that an average woman really stood a chance against a violent man. They are finding out that life isn't a movie. Without good men to interfere, whether as police or as good Samaritans, they are left to the mercy of the thugs. And that is not ever going to be a fair fight. These are not minor assaults either. Only moments after their assaults, the videos show these women's faces already distorted by swelling and starting to bruise. One 57-year-old woman, a school bus aide, coming home from work, whose assault was caught on video, happened to pass a 33-year-old man on the sidewalk. Without any words or provocation, he punches her so hard that she nearly falls out into the street. She recounted her shock through a broken jaw that is now wired shut, her face horrifically swollen from that one blow. Her jaw was shattered, multiple fractures to her face, 3 teeth knocked out, her lip is permanently damaged, and she is facing surgery after her present 6 weeks of drinking through a straw. The man who did this has a record of violence, and thanks to decriminalization of crimes, this violent assault is only considered a misdemeanor. He has been released to assault his next victim, and thanks to BLM bail reform, he's out without any bail even being required. His latest victim would not be suffering now if he had been held responsible for any of the 7 prior crimes he was arrested for, and however many else he committed without being caught. These stories are not rare, unfortunately, and they are growing more common by the day. But it is not, as you might suppose, primarily due to more people committing crimes, although that does play some part. It is still a small group of lawbreakers who are simply being allowed to repeatedly break the law that are racking up all these victims. The man who gunned down an NYPD officer this week had 21 prior arrests. And after taking the life of a man who devoted his to serving and protecting us, the killer was found to have a shiv stored in his rectum the whole time, in case he was returned to jail. But with his record, why was he allowed to be on the streets ever again in the first place? There were 13,600 arrests in the subways of New York City in 2023. These are only the arrests, not counting the incidents where the perpetrator was not apprehended. Of these arrests, 13,600, 124 people were arrested more than 5 times each. And that's just counting 2023, which accounts for well over 600 of these arrests. When their records were examined further, these 124 criminals were found to have over 7,500 arrests between them during their life. So far. That is an average of over 60 arrests per person. And they still walk the streets, endangering the innocent. People like this are the reason why abolishing the 3 strikes rule was quite literally a suicidal move by society. How many victims would have been saved if these people had never seen the light of day again after their third offense? I can tell you, I calculated it. 7,128 victims that we know of, not counting their unknown victims. And we know statistically that for every crime where someone is caught, there are multiple crimes that they have committed that they will never be linked to. But even setting that aside, in order for these 124 criminals to each get a 61st chance, well over 7,000 entirely innocent victims were sacrificed by people who preach that obeying the law should somehow be optional. Do we get a say in the world we have to live in? Those of us who don't live in gated communities with private security? Yes, as it turns out, we do. We can vote out every person who refuses to follow the laws they were elected to uphold, from the president down. And we can elect whichever new candidate promises not only to uphold the laws and punish crime, but whoever is willing to set the precedent of prosecuting those who spit on their duty and the laws in violation of their oaths of office. And if these new politicians don't keep their promise, we can make it clear that we will vote them out and prosecute them too. Nearly 1/3 of New York City's epidemic of shoplifting can be traced to just 327 repeat offenders, who have each been arrested more than 18 times just last year. I repeat, each of these 327 offenders have been arrested more than 18 times each in 1 year. And rather than remove these known repeat offenders permanently from access to more victims, New York City has decided to spend an unimaginable amount of tax dollars that it doesn't have to body scan everyone entering the subway. Apparently, an Asian grandma with groceries is just as likely to push someone onto the tracks as a homeless guy talking to himself is, and we mustn't pretend we know otherwise. If people have to die so we can play pretend, they guess there's just no way to avoid that. The stats say that 9 out of every 10 assaults in New York City are committed by Black and Hispanic males. Hey, I didn't do this study. I didn't write the research. That's what the stats say. Rather than acknowledge this, while we should also acknowledge that this is not a reason to condemn all Black and Hispanic men, this is a small group of repeat offenders. But rather than acknowledge that, millions of dollars, presumably, must be spent, and an already understaffed police force must be further busied and stretched. And will it even help? An unarmed man who walks through a body scanner can still push people onto the tracks too. We're being told that women must endure being punched in the face at random, businessmen pushed to their deaths, and mom and pop businesses run out of business by shoplifters so that this small group of repeat offenders can be given unlimited chances. There's nothing else we can do, we're told. Heaven forbid we return to the tried and true by limiting crimes to the unreasonable maximum of 3. I myself have never committed a crime. It is possible. Dare to dream, people. We are told we must spend a fortune on systems that make everyday tasks even more difficult for the law-abiding without stopping any of the violence. Because the bail reforms allow everyone that these systems catch to be right back out on the streets. And heaven knows these reforms must not be repealed. We must all suffer under the tyranny of the lawless rather than return to the, quote, unfair, dark days when adults with free will only got 3 chances. We are told our good Samaritans must be jailed even while the criminals are not. in order to stop vigilantes, that the police must be reduced to a handful and our military must be allowed to shrink to insignificance, leaving all of us utterly unprotected, exposed to the worst that humanity can and has thrown at those it knows it can tyrannize and brutalize. We are told our country must drown in debt and crime victims, that our own must suffer silently, that the deadly fentanyl epidemic must continue unchecked, rather than allowing us to decide to enforce the border and choose who we allow in and on what terms. 295 people are dying in the United States every day from fentanyl. Nearly 300 people every day, making it the leading cause of death for all people between the ages of 18 and 49. That's over 12 people every hour, more than one person every 5 minutes. And most of them aren't knowingly taking it. They're taking other drugs like Adderall without knowing their version has been laced with the very deadly fentanyl. At this rate, there are 64,605 people living right now who will be dead by Election Day. This was back in April. And that's if the rates don't continue to increase. We will see 87,025 deaths between today and Inauguration Day when the next president takes power. That is almost 35 times the number of Americans who died on D-Day. And apparently we are powerless to save them or their families. But we must not forget their existence when the day comes to do something on November 5th. Or else 511,825 people, over 500,000 of our loved ones, will be dead by the time the next president takes power in 2029. That will be more dead than if we relived 9/11. And I never include the terrorist in 9/11 death statistics. More than 171 times in the next 4 years. And that is if the epidemic rates do not increase during those years. All these things are being allowed to happen because we have remained silent for too long, while charlatans have preached the virtue of allowing people to ignore the laws when they disagree with them. If they object to a law on principle, rather than having to make a case and put in the work to change the law, they should be allowed to simply ignore it or even break it. Will the rest of us keep turning a blind eye because we believe that they mean well and do it all out of an overabundance of compassion? We must now finally stop and ask if that even matters. Are we, you and I, willing to live in the world they are creating and intend to devolve further, all from the safety of their ivory towers? It is time to say loudly and firmly, the laws are the laws for everyone. No more sanctuary. Thank you for listening to today's Retroactive Podcast, and I will hopefully see you next week.